Good morning. This is Melissa Buckley with the Multifamily Upgrade Program. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started with our operations and maintenance training. This is the first in a two-part training. The next will be held in February. And we're joined today by John Rockwell, who's the National Client Manager at Partner Energy and has delivered the first part in the longer series of training that we did last fall on asset management. So he'll get us started here in just a minute. First, we'll go ahead and show you just a few things to keep in mind about using GoToWebinar. So right now, all of you are muted. When we do take questions, if we do take them by phone, you'll need to make sure that you enter your audio PIN if you've joined via phone. Otherwise, you can type questions into the questions box, which you'll find towards the bottom of that toolbar, the GoToWebinar toolbar. And that should really take care of it. I'll be monitoring questions throughout, so let me know if you need anything. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to John.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Good morning, everybody. Happy to be here again for the second part in this series. Operations and maintenance is what we're covering now, and this will be a two-parter in and of itself. Today is part one, and then around this time next month, I believe I'll be back for part two. So the course agenda, roughly, high level, is these 5 points here. We're gonna talk about the introduction to O&M manuals, what they are, why they exist, what role and purpose they're serving, adapting to new requirements, introduction to the various sections of the O&M manual itself, and then a step-by-step manual creation, really a deep dive into all the major sections of the manual, and a real how-to in terms of creating a good boilerplate manual, and that'll lead directly into best practices and multifamily upgrade program integration, and how an O&M manual can best serve you and the building engineers and the property managers for multifamily properties that are working within this PG&E program. So for today, we have a little bit less than an hour, and so we're going to be looking at these first 3 bullet points and really getting everybody up to the same base level of understanding in terms of what an operations and maintenance manual is, who the stakeholders are for relying on the manual and its contents, and then making an effective transition into how to build the manual itself in course number 2. And we'll leave some time at the end for questions, and definitely welcome them if anyone has any. So to begin, fundamentally, who reads an O&M manual, operations and maintenance manual? What's the intended audience? So for those of you that may have been in attendance in the asset management webinar that we did, this hierarchy will probably look a little familiar. This is essentially boiling down the different tasks or metrics of a building into its appropriate hierarchy. And so we assigned each one of these tasks or data points or topics a role within the building ownership or stakeholder pool. And so this is what we came up with. Building engineers are majorly concerned in working with facility data directly. That rolls up to lifecycle management and performance indicators for property managers. Subsequently, all that rolls up to reports that asset managers see, where the strategic and tactical decision making is taking place. So the ownership manual sort of blankets the lower half of this pyramid. It is intended for property managers and building engineers to have a guide for how to operate their property over the life of their involvement, of the life of the ownership of the property in an effective way. So really, what does that mean exactly? What is its purpose? So the way I like to think of it, an O&M manual exists for one purpose, and that is to provide structured, repeatable guidance for the building engineers, for the property managers. It's taking the chaos of day-to-day building management and bringing it into order that does not rely on institutional knowledge in the cloud, that does not rely on individual building engineer knowledge who may have been there for 30 years and hasn't written anything down, but into a structured, repeatable order, and that guidance can be passed on from staff member to staff member, and the building can operate at its peak efficiency. So key areas in terms of this guidance concept, really no asset management manual would be complete without addressing these three extremely high-level macro topics, and that is policies and procedures for the building staff, mitigating preventative maintenance lapses. And by that, I really mean that we're talking about the concept of preventative maintenance as a whole. It needs to be tied to something concrete and referable, in this case the O&M manual, that minimizes the chance of this preventative maintenance either being forgotten about or lost during staff turnover, or any number of reasons why that maintenance might start to lapse in terms of its frequency or its consistency of approach. And so we have to do everything we can as stakeholders, vendors, building engineers to mitigate that potential lapse in preventative maintenance. And lastly, centralized information and documentation. Really, it needs to be the central repository for all of the spec sheets, product guides, manuals, systems manuals, equipment manuals, and the like. And it needs to be easily identifiable where that is and accessible to everyone. So taking a step back, why do owners need it? And this is probably intuitive to most people, but I thought it was interesting nonetheless. So here is a pie chart documenting the 30-year cost of owning and operating a building. And what jumped out to me, obviously, is that over 90% of those 30-year costs are taken up by employee wages and benefits. And so what essentially that's saying to us is that paying on-site personnel to take care of a building is by far more expensive over time than the initial cost of construction, than the recurring cost of systems replacement, whether it's old or broken, end of useful life. And that creating an O&M manual helps to reduce the amount of staff and staff time a building needs to operate over this life, whether it be 30 years, 10 years, whatever the hypothetical life that the stakeholders are involved in a building is. So looking at that another way, we're never going to really break out of these percentages here. Employees and wages and benefits is always going to be the dominating factor. Having an O&M manual isn't going to make it 20% or 30%. But what it's really going to do is shrink this pie so we spend less money over time on preventative maintenance, deferred maintenance, things that otherwise could have been avoided by a robust O&M manual. And I'm representing that here with the teeter-totter concept. If we have a weak O&M manual, we're going to end up with the largest pie possible in terms of money that the owner is shilling out every year for operations and maintenance, costing them money, obviously. So I think that is commonly referred to as reactive maintenance. It has sort of the lowest hanging fruit in terms of advantages. It's low cost in terms of building staff and procedures and repair bills, and less staff is needed to implement sort of a robust O&M plan. But once you look beneath those very superficial cost advantages, you see that there's actually hidden costs that flip that on its head and make it completely irrational. We have increased costs due to unplanned downtime of the equipment. We're increasing our labor costs, especially if overtime is needed for things like emergency repairs. Costs involved with repair and replacement of the equipment, obviously, and then backup equipment that may subsequently need repair itself. And of course, inefficient use of staff resources. So when you're looking at the annual budget for next year, you initially see a low cost advantage by having not a big O&M line item. But over the course of that year, you would see all these hidden costs pop up, and those hidden costs now become real quantifiable financial disadvantages. So then the other side of the spectrum, a building with a strong O&M manual is tilting that scale in the building owner and all the stakeholders' favor. We're keeping that operational pie as small as possible. So while we're still devoting the vast majority of our resources to people, which is a good thing anyways, because that's really what makes things work, that pie is manageable and small and better than our peers, or at worst equal to our peers, and making us competitive in the market. So what does that look like? That, I think everyone's familiar with the preventative maintenance, but the advantages are many and obvious. It's cost effective in many capital intensive processes. The flexibility allows for the adjustment of maintenance periodicity. We also have increased component life cycles, where we're really squeezing out the efficiency of all of our equipment and building systems. There's energy savings. The utility line item expense in your monthly budget is as low as possible. And reduced equipment or process failure. And you can even try to quantify it if you look sort of nationally across all building classes. We look at 12 to 18% cost savings when executing an effective preventive maintenance program rather than a reactive maintenance program. And how do you do that? Through the O&M manual. That's really the backbone document making such a practice possible. And the disadvantages, inverse to the previous slide, catastrophic systems failures are more likely to occur. It ends up being more labor intensive after all. There's performance of unneeded maintenance, potential for incidental damages to components downstream or when conducting unneeded maintenance. So thinking about it another way, why did operations and maintenance manuals become commonplace in the design build phase? So we looked at this survey, and I'm not sure how many of you can read the green title bar of this graph, but I'll read it. Which of the following aspects of life cycle costs are most important to your organization? So this survey was posed to facility management executives, and their responses can be summarized in these 5 points on the left. operations and maintenance costs, durability / expected life services, initial cost, replacement costs, and lastly, recycling and disposable costs. And so what we see is an overwhelming response. Over 70% of the responses say that the cost to maintain equipment and that equipment's ability to operate effectively are top priorities by far. By far, they're top priorities. And so this feeds directly into the hands of an O&M manual. These are the subjects directly addressed by a strong O&M manual and practice. And so we're really tackling facility management executives' top concerns head on. So equipment, rehashing the theme of more expensive to not do proper maintenance than it is to have a robust maintenance budget. Equipment is expected to fail more quickly when it is not maintained properly and frequently. And again, that means a higher probability of unplanned emergency maintenance, which would ultimately be very costly compared to the preventative option. So note that for a period of time, equipment will run at its optimal performance regardless of the quality of maintenance. We see that at the beginning of this chart. And let me pause a second and sort of break down this chart. So on the vertical axis, we have performance. So higher up on the chart is high performance. Lower on the vertical axis is poor or low performance. And then the horizontal axis is, of course, time. Year zero or day zero is on the left-hand side, going out to our defined date. Maybe that's the 30-year building life cycle or whatever it may be, stretching out over time. And so nearly all equipment will run at optimal performance in the beginning, regardless of the quality of maintenance. I think that's a given. The O&M manual is more about extending the longevity of that equipment rather than bumping up its efficiency. So we're always going to sort of run into the equipment's efficiency cap, and O&M is never going to supercharge that. But what it will do is make the decline of this purple line as slow and less steep as possible. So when you look at this chart and you see that the purple line is intersecting the minimal acceptable performance line, so the middle black line, that is not a set date in the future. That's not December 1st, 2025. That is the date that is defined by our equipment failing to meet its performance expectations. And for argument's sake, that is directly tied to our level of engagement and the robustness of our O&M manual. If we do nothing, that purple line is going to intersect the minimal acceptable performance line in a couple of years. But if we have a robust O&M plan and O&M manual, that intersection could be 10, 15, 20 years from now. So it's our job, it's building managers, building engineers' jobs to make that point happen in the distant future as much as possible. So where does O&M fit into the broader building life cycle scheme? Oh, I pulled this information from the Federal Energy Management Program Operations and Maintenance Best Practice Guide. And it outlines best practices to help federal agencies implement effective O&M for systems and equipment found at their facilities. But I liked it so much, I copied it straight over, and in my opinion, it wonderfully summarizes the role of O&M in a healthy building life cycle. And so I'm just going to take a minute to read this, and then we can discuss. So O&M management is a critical component to the overall program, healthy building life cycle. The management function should bind the distinct parts of the program into a cohesive entity. From our experience, the overall program should contain 5 very distinct functions making up the organization: operations, maintenance, engineering, training, and administration. So those are 5 very distinct functions, but as you can see from the graphic on the right, they're all interconnected to an incredible degree. They're distinct, but they can't operate without one another effectively. So beyond establishing and facilitating what they term the OMETA links, O&M managers have the responsibility of interfacing with other department managers and making their case for ever-shrinking budgets. So that's written for this federal agency, specifically what they are facing in terms of struggles and what they have in mind. But I think that is so incredibly universal. You know, what property manager is not facing departments that don't communicate with each other as well as they should, or ever-shrinking fiscal year budget planning, or at least if it's not shrinking, it's not growing as much as they would like it to. I think those are incredibly universal concerns, and it makes this so relevant. So their roles also include project implementation functions, as well as the need to maintain persistence of the program and its goals. So let's take a little bit of time to look at each one of these and see what they mean and how it applies and circles back to the O&M manual. So for operations, there are really 4 major components that they're looking at there. Administration, and so the administration, this will be a common theme throughout this section. Who knew federal agencies were so big on administration? But here we're saying that to ensure effective implementation and control of the operation activities, there needs to be strong administration. And really practically what that means, in my mind, is that you have to have an engaged stakeholder or a flag bearer that is taking ownership of the operations phase and really making it their own and making sure that it doesn't fall victim to procrastination or deprioritization, and just making sure that everything gets done and stays on the forefront of everybody's mind, or at least as front burner as it needs to be. So secondarily, conduct of operations, all that's saying is that we need to ensure efficient, safe, and reliable process operations. So conduct, however the operations side ends up being defined and applicable to your building, conduct it in a way that is efficient, safe, and reliable. Then we have equipment status control, and this is saying take a step back, be cognizant of the status of all equipment. That's pretty vague, but on a building by building basis, that can take different shapes or forms. That can be a complex BMS system, it could be monitoring based commissioning, it could be your maintenance and building logs. But the takeaway there is whoever is championing this operations phase, they need to be cognizant of the status of all that equipment, however they may be doing it. And then lastly, operator knowledge and performance. And so this will tie into some other of the phases in a moment. But what this is saying is that we need to ensure that operator knowledge and performance goes hand in hand with safe and reliable facility operation. We whatever we're doing, whatever efficiency strides we're making, it can't be done at the expense of safe and reliable operation procedures. So now we start getting a little more granular into the actual systems preventive maintenance side of things. So for the maintenance phase, again, we're leading with administration. So all that is saying is there has to be a strong administrative structure in place to push this, push the importance of this phase and this program onto the building staff and managers. So then work control system, again, this is to control the performance of the maintenance in an efficient and safe manner, and that we don't lose sight of what is economical, what is safe, and what is reliable in terms of operations as we work towards better optimization, better efficiency. And then the actual conducting of the maintenance, same thing. It can't be done at the expense of safety and efficiency. Whatever that specifically means for that building, whatever that specifically means for those systems, always needs to be a priority. And then feeding directly from that, the preventative maintenance itself. So we've sort of talked about preventative maintenance at length. And so, again, all we're saying there is that optimum performance and reliability of building systems and equipment needs to be prioritized ahead of time. Can't be reactive, needs to be preventative. And then lastly, the maintenance procedures and documentation that is so critical to, it's a foundation to the operations and maintenance manual concept. Anything we're doing needs to be documented, and a procedure needs to be drafted. A building engineer who knows the chiller, who knows the boiler, who knows the P-TEC unit like the back of his or her hand, that's great if they do, but if they don't write it down, we're sunk. It needs to be well documented, a procedure needs to be established, and needs to be available for all to see and train up on. So getting more down the funnel in terms of technicality. So we've gone from operations, we've gone to maintenance, now we're drilling down into engineering support. Very similar concept, just applied to the engineering discipline specifically. So again, bullet point number one, leading with administration. You need that flag bearer to always be championing your cause. And then equipment modifications. So ensure proper design, review, control, implementation, things like that, and of course documentation of any equipment design changes are done in a timely manner. We're starting to hammer pretty heavily on the theme of tracking and documenting, and that'll be a persistent theme throughout the manual development. But any modifications done for any of those reasons need to follow that concept. And of course, equipment performance monitoring. Like we said before, to perform monitoring activities that optimize equipment reliability and efficiency, we need to develop a monitoring plan. And so that could take any number of forms. It could be data loggers, it could be benchmarking with the utility company, it could be monitoring-based commissioning, it could be the existing BMS system. Any of those things need to be done in such a way that it supports that goal. And then policies and procedures and documentation need to be well established and well adhered to. So the training phase is sort of like the administration phase that we'll talk about on the next slide. The training phase is obviously an umbrella that sort of covers the whole concept here. The administration, vitally important there, but general employee training. We need to ensure that facility personnel have basic understanding of their responsibilities and, of course, safe work practices, and that they have knowledge and the practical abilities necessary to operate the building safely and reliably. Training facilities and equipment. Now, this is the one point that I think is a little more specific towards these larger programs, these larger facilities. This is a little more federal, I think, than is applicable to us. So, for multifamily buildings, I think this will be the NA, not applicable most of the time. But the concept here is facilities for training and equipment for training need to be made readily available if we're going to establish any kind of routine for an appropriate, robust training phase or regimen. And so, if this is third-party certification training, obviously the facilities equipment might come outside of the building. It might come from the proctor or the certification governing body, or some of the third-party training programs, but the concept remains the same. And then operator training. So more specific than the concept of general employee training. Now we're talking about those who are fulfilling the role of building operations. We need to develop and improve their knowledge and skills specifically necessary to perform the operator job function. It may seem intuitive, but in terms of manual development and process development, it needs to be said, it needs to be stated, and it needs to be prioritized. And then maintenance training, different side of the same coin. Those staff whose role is critical to the maintenance side, they need the specific maintenance training to develop and improve their knowledge and skills. And lastly, administration. So administration gets its own phase, and the first bullet point, sub-bullet point of administration is administration. So if you needed any more convincing that this concept came from a federal agency, there it is, administration of administration. But all joking aside, the concept remains valid and strong. So many times within organizations, and I've experienced this myself many times, so many times within organizations or within building staff, any kind of group that's working towards a common goal, if the idea, and in this case, the development of a robust operations and maintenance manual, policies and procedures, if the idea is not tackled appropriately from an administrative standpoint, it increases the risk of failure and the process falling apart immensely. If we do not have the right people championing the prioritization of the cause and helping to provide the administrative support to get it done, you can have all the technical people in the world working on your project, but I think it'll ultimately fall flat because priorities shift, deadlines get in the way, life happens. So there needs to be dedicated resources on the administrative side of this type of development. So with that being said, some of the key takeaways for the administrative side, besides the organization and administration point, is management objectives. If we're able to get management to buy in on the objective of what we're trying to do, the O&M manual creation or fleshing out our O&M policies and procedures more, then that's half the battle right there, because they, the boss, is now supporting what you're doing and what you're devoting resources to. And it shouldn't take much convincing. We spent the first half of the presentation talking about all the reasons why management should already be advocating for an O&M manual. And then management assessment, monitor and assess activities to improve all aspects of equipment performance. So we can't improve what we can't measure. That's both from an engineer measuring and assessing a piece of equipment to management measuring and assessing staff and policies and procedures. So if we're getting management engaged and on the objective front, we need to get them engaged on the other side, on the assessment front, and get everybody working towards the same common goal. And then some things, these last two bullet points seem obvious, but need to be said. Personnel planning and qualification. To ensure the best operating building, hire the best qualified individuals. Highly qualified individuals usually produce highly desirable results. So don't skimp on the personnel where it really matters. And last but not least, safety. Do not sacrifice safety to achieve any of these goals. Good people, safe workspaces should be the top two priorities for any type of O&M plan that will be set in place or set in motion. So tying it all back around, those are the 5 phases of a healthy building with a strong O&M integration plan. So these all work with a degree of autonomy, but as you know, they are all interconnected to varying degrees, and oftentimes, in single buildings, people will be wearing all 5 of these hats at once. We're not talking about million-square-foot buildings with a staff of 150 people. We're talking about a building with a staff of 3, and these roles are often doubled up, or yeah, the hat. All 5 hats are worn by one person, but that does not make the emphasis on each one of these phases as a standalone pillar less important. So taking a quick detour and pausing briefly to talk about external motivating factors. So everything up until now has been explaining why an O&M manual just makes sense to do. So sometimes we're getting externally motivated instead of that internal intrinsic motivation. Obviously, if it's requested by the building owner, staff has to do it. 2, it's a requirement. If we're building or operating in the state of California, we have to comply with Cal Green Building Code. And that code now requires an O&M manual. And if the staff is putting together an O&M manual really just because they have to for either bullet point 1 or bullet point 2, we're really losing a lot of the intrinsic value of the manual, because it requires, to really flourish, it requires staff buy-in rather than just going through the motions of downloading a template, filling in the blanks, and putting it on your shelf. If we're not believing in its benefits, the building's not going to get any better. The manual is just going to collect dust. It's going to be there. It's going to be a box that gets checked. So while these external motivating factors are important because a lot of times they must be done, we really should keep in our crosshairs the development of an intrinsic motivation to have a strong O&M manual and see why, from a financial perspective, from a quality of life perspective, it's better to have than not. And then lastly, green certification systems like LEED, like Green Point Rated, those also require to varying degrees a O&M manual creation and be in place. Hypothetically, if you're getting green certification, you're already a little more healthy building minded. So I think the concept is that the intrinsic motivation should be there to a larger degree than if you're being required by the state of California to do it. But the concept still remains. No manual, no matter how great, no matter how robust, will fall flat if the building staff is not buying into it. So getting into the specifics of an O&M manual, the teasing day 2 a little bit here. Here's a simple layout of the major sections in an O&M manual. One, basic information, all the pertinent building data that you might see on a CoStar report or a LoopNet report: name, address, square footage, brief description, things like that. Contact info for key personnel roles and responsibilities. All these things that should be available at a glance. It should be in this first section. And then special certifications and or verifications. Obviously, that is sort of highly building specific. So whatever makes sense for your building to put into that section should go there towards the front and be one of the first things people see after looking at the basic information. And so those can be green certifications, or it can be certificates of occupancy, or any kind of locally required, state required verifications, whether they are awarded one time or need to be referred back to on an annual basis. They should all be coming up in short order after the basic building data. And then naturally flowing from that are programmatic requirements. What does this building need that may be program related? If it's a requirement, obviously we don't want to be digging and hunting and pecking for it. It's something we want easy access to. We want it at our fingertips. So anything germane to the building program involvement should obviously reside there. And then fourthly, the irrigation water conservation section. That's something that we added recently, and I think is really germane to California properties specifically. If you go around the country and interview building engineers and look at their manuals, this is probably a section that in the past has been buried into another section, and subsection of a different category. But here, I think it makes sense to have it be a standalone section because it does place the needed emphasis on this concept, and so it's something that no O&M manual should be without, certainly. And then equipment manuals. That one kind of explains itself. Every building system, every piece of equipment that we care about or may be forced to care about, we should have a manual for it, and it should reside in one singular location. The problem, especially on larger buildings, is that you have different staff hoarding different manuals based on the equipment that they're responsible for. So they all want the manuals to be in their own top drawer, and then if someone new comes along or if there's turnover, it becomes an Easter egg hunt to go find the equipment manual. So keeping it in a single depository is critical, and really, really saves everyone's time. Going back to that pie chart where 90% of the resources are spent on people, we want people's time to be spent wisely and efficiently, and let them be freed up for other tasks. So keeping this kind of stuff in one place is obviously a good step in the right direction. Similarly, maintenance log templates, and I say templates because we don't necessarily need the maintenance log for every piece of equipment to be in this specific section, because maybe it does make sense for the logs, individual logs, to be categorized differently depending on how the building staff wants to see things develop. But in terms of templates, for sure, they should all be in one easy to find place. There should never be the question of, oh, where do I get that template versus where do I get this template? It should all be readily available. And then hand in hand with equipment manuals, systems warranty information is sometimes a forgotten topic, but vitally important. We need to know when building systems and equipment warranties are up. We don't want to spend unneeded repair money on things that could have been covered under warranty. And especially for larger buildings, having this section start with like a warranty summary, almost like a Gantt chart of building systems and their warranty dates, is a really nice way to keep at your fingertips a view, sort of high-level view of where you are in terms of warranties for the building systems. So very, very important. And then lastly, the additional documents or the miscellaneous section, anything that is of pertinent value can go there. So examples of operations and maintenance manuals, the takeaway here is really that operations and maintenance manuals need to contain a certain classification of items or a certain list of items. But how that looks and how that's structured is completely up to you and the building engineer and the property manager and the building staff. And oftentimes it reflects the personality of the building staff in its form. We can have creative O&M manuals like this one I pulled from the Smithsonian website. Great use of white space, great use of graphics. This looks fun to read. It looks almost like a marketing brochure that I want to flip through and keep reading. And their whole manual looks like this. And it's obviously took a lot of time from a lot of creative people to put this together, but let the manual reflect your building staff's personality. Don't get pigeonholed into a specific template. Let whatever is good for you be reflected in the manual itself. Likewise, here's a template I downloaded from the web, and I had to look in the manual to find anything that wasn't a wall of text, and that was this chart here on the right. Everything else looked pretty much like this left-hand side, which to me reminded me of like a doctoral thesis, or like I was opening up the IRS tax code. It was pretty dry, pretty boring. I might fall asleep if I'm trying to read the whole manual before my first day on the job, but still, it contains all the vital information. It's robust, it's thorough. It has a good table of contents. I can jump to whatever section I need to when I need to. So it doesn't matter how you get there. It just matters that you adhere to a constant use and updating and keep the critical parts of the manual together and active. So in closing, I wanted to talk a little bit about ways to jumpstart the operations and maintenance manual and its adoption in terms of creating a healthy building environment. And so these are 10 tips, tricks, steps, whatever you want to call them, for getting the most out of your operations and maintenance manual. So I'll go through it briefly here. Number one, increase management awareness. So obviously, if you have that external factor of management telling you that you have to do an owner's manual or an operations and maintenance manual, this isn't as relevant. But if you're at the engineer level or the property manager level, get management involved, because that'll help you and your team stay energized. So first, after you've achieved awareness, track and log the O&M activities. And that's a theme that is going to be, I think, constant throughout the next course. Track and log, track and log, track and log. Especially when you're starting out, there's almost no way to overdo the amount of tracking and logging. Track everything you do, log everything you do. If you find over time that you don't need to do certain things or you don't need to track certain things, you know, do away with it and just keep your critical maintenance logs or operations logs. But when you're finding your way, track everything, log everything. And then use that information to sit down and identify the troubled areas and systems of the building. Identify that list of deferred maintenance. You know, earlier we were talking about preventative maintenance and reactive maintenance. Well, the things that we haven't reacted to yet in terms of maintenance, those usually fall under the deferred maintenance category, which is like, oh no, we've been putting this off for as long as we can because we don't have the money for it. So deferred maintenance, other things you may have identified during your tracking and logging, you make a list of it and then commit to addressing a trouble spot. Maybe you've identified 10, 15, 20 things and it's overwhelming. You do like that personal motivation trick where if there's a task that you can do that you know will take 3 minutes, do it right now. You don't put it on your calendar for next week. Don't say you'll do it later. You'll fight that procrastination instinct. And if it's short and you can see the finish line, do it now, get it out of the way. You can address this issue in the same way. If you have an overwhelming list of troubles, commit to addressing one spot and have it be the easiest project. Or if you don't like that, you can do a maintenance priority matrix and prioritize things based on how urgent they seem. Obviously, things that are health and safety related would be of utmost importance. And you kind of go down the list from there, and you can prioritize or deprioritize based on how you see fit. But pick one thing, and then strive for operational efficiency with that one thing. So you're setting a goal. How does this one trouble spot that I've identified look at peak operational efficiency? What is my goal? And once you've established that, you collect all the needed diagnostic monitoring and metering data. This is obviously dependent on the problem that you've identified, but the concept remains the same. Collect all the data that you need to make an accurate judgment about how to address that problem. Trend the data as necessary and decide on a course of action. And most critically, act. And now you've completed your first operational efficiency project. Highlight this success and take it to all stakeholders. Back at point number 1, you've increased management awareness. So you should pat yourself on the back, celebrate your team, make this, frankly, a joyous occasion for the building if you're trying to change the culture around operations and maintenance. We're trying to create a positive feedback loop here. We're taking the lowest hanging fruit in terms of trouble spots, making it a win, and having it be a positive feedback loop for future improvement. So we've done that. Management is happy. Everyone is went out for happy hour, and the next day we select another trouble spot and we begin again. And we do it over and over again until we've worked through that list and we've built up our operational and maintenance confidence, and we have a robust manual and a healthy building. So it's a little before noon. That's the last slide. As I mentioned, a lot of foundation laying in this day. Day 2 next month will be a deconstruction of the manual and how to build up each specific part of the manual, so much more technical. But for now, passing it back to Melissa and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, John. That was really great. I don't see any questions in the question box, but if you do have some, please enter or go ahead and raise your hand. And I will scroll through here to see if anybody would like to talk further. All right, I don't see any, so I think we could go ahead and wrap up. The next presentation on this topic will be, I believe it's February 22nd. We'll make sure that we get an announcement out to all of you. Thank you for attending. Thank you, John, as always, for a wonderful presentation, and we look forward to next month.
Great, thank you.
Okay, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.